Welcome back. This is track 1 of ENDORSE, the European Data Conference on Reference Data and Semantics. I hope you've had a chance to grab a coffee, as we've got a great packed session for you next here in track 1, which is reference data is what we're looking at today. If you're after solutions, that's track 2. You can, of course, choose which one you want to follow for the rest of this afternoon. Now, we do want you to interact, so feel free to use the chat if you're logged in to send us questions, and we will pass those on to our excellent expert speakers. So, without any further ado, we're going to talk about unlocking the data-driven organization. And joining us to tell us more about that, we have Juan Sequeda and George Fletcher from data.world. Gentlemen, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, we are. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody.
Fantastic. Then I will hand over to you. The floor is yours.
All right. All right, so you should be able to see my screen. So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Juan Sequeda. I'm the principal scientist at data.world, and I'm joined by my colleague, Professor George Fletcher. George, are you there?
Hi, everyone. Good day.
So let's dive in. So I want to start with the takeaway. And the takeaway here is that the next big wave is about knowledge. For the last decade or more, we have been focusing on big data. We've been focusing on data science, right? This has been the biggest rave for the past decade. But the thesis of our talk here is that we need to start focusing on knowledge, and in particular, what we're calling knowledge science. And frankly, the knowledge scientist is the role who understands, manages, and is responsible for the meaning of data. And when we mean meaning of data, we mean the semantics of data. So I think one important aspect is that we talk a lot about technology, we talk a lot about all the tools, but we need to understand that bringing knowledge in involves people. And for this people part, we have the knowledge scientist. And what does this mean if you're a student? It means that there's new opportunities for leadership and impacting on the next cool thing. What does it mean for universities? I think there's two ways. There's two aspects. One, there's a new space of intellectual inquiry, of research, of making social impact, and also about how, just on the research aspect about it, but also on how are we educating the next generation of students and next data professionals. And finally, what does this mean for industries? There is a paradigm shift that we're going to go through. It is not just technology, it's a paradigm shift of people. And we need to understand and treat data as a product, and we need to have people around that. So this is the very typical kind of view that we see in all types of presentations, which is we'll have a bunch of sources of data and you have data producers, right? You have people who are your data engineers, your data stewards, and then there's the consumers of data. They're the people like data analysts and data scientists that they need to go answer questions. And truly, there is this gap between the producers and the consumers. And if we start looking at the gap is the knowledge is not always shared, right? We can dump all the data into a lake and probably even add metadata about the data that we added to the lake. But still, the actual semantics, what these actual stuff does not, the meaning of this data is not even shared. Who is responsible? I ask this to everybody who I talk to. Who is responsible for your data within your organization? Who gets applaud if something amazing happens? Who is accountable if something not great happens with the data? What is the culture around your data? What are the processes? What are the methodologies that you have around? What we see a lot is that this is an ad hoc process. This is the type of things this is the paradigm shift that we need to start thinking about. So I love history. I think history is one of the things that if we don't understand where we're coming from, we're going to go repeat it. So let's look a little bit of history, where we've been coming from. So for 10, almost 20 years now, right, we had this big trend of big data. And this happened because we have the web, we have Moore's Law, right? We're able to start generating a bunch of data. And organizations realize we need to go harness and go collect all this data. And the result is that we have all this technology, right? Commodity computing platforms. And that's why we have Hadoop came out of this. And what was the role that came out of this entire process right here? That's when the role of the data engineer started. That you remember almost 15 years ago, you needed to go have data engineers to go come up with all these big data platforms to go set up your Hadoop cluster and so forth. But then the next trend that we see is that, we start gathering a lot of data. And now we have all this big data, right? We start seeing NoSQL, and then we have all these GPU computes, and we start saying we get all this data. We can do so much stuff with the data, and we have this AI revolution. That's why machine learning and deep learning starts to grow about it, because we need to draw value from this data. And the reason the reason why we were able to go do this easily is that we had all machine learning basically became a commodity. Now everybody can go get TensorFlow and start doing things with data. And that's when you start seeing the role of the data scientist. But now, what is the trend that we're seeing now? We're seeing the trend of digital transformations, right? Everybody's talking about being a data-driven organization, but what does that actually mean? And we're seeing this combination of AI, the AI revolution, and everything going to the cloud. And we're starting to see all these different technologies about how to go clean data, how to wrangle data. We have data catalogs to understand what data we have out there. We have the entire knowledge graphs, and all the semantic technologies have matured enough to be able to go help us understand what that data is. And this is what we call the need right now within organizations, is that we need to trust and rely on data. So what do we mean by rely on data? First of all, the products of data science are not just this extra bonus that we get, right? They're actually the center of an organization's value. And by relying on data, Professor George Fletcher and Professor Paul Groth and I have been thinking about this, and we have these 5 properties, and I will acknowledge that this is our kind of a subjective view of this. One, reliable data needs to be clean data, right? It needs to be data that we can go validate, that has been enriched, that it's normalized, right? This is the traditional kind of aspects that you think about what data is, that it should be clean. But at the same time, reliable data needs to be grounded in a shared meaning spaces. In other words, we need to have ontologies. We need to be able to connect that different knowledge about how organizations or different part of the organizations think about the data, and connect that with the raw data. Third, reliable data is in context. And this is a conversation I've had with several colleagues, is a consumer of data says, I have this use case, give me data for this use case. I'm going to go consume this data. But the owner of that data should say, wait, my data is not you cannot use my data for your context, for your particular use case. We need to understand how data can and should be used depending on the context. Fourth, reliable data means that it needs to be accessible in a standardized format. I mean, we see this all the way back for 10 plus years, or even more, 15 years, when Tim Berners-Lee has the linked data principles. We now see this now with the FAIR, right? The findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable data. We have all these standards to be able to go represent data on the web. We have all the semantic web standards, RDF. We have standardized ontologies and vocabularies out there. Finally, reliable data needs to be maintained. The world changes, right? Meaning may change for things within an organization. Companies may get acquired and they need to go update their meaning of things. Reliable data is data that is maintained. So ask yourself, who is in charge of cleaning data, maintaining shared spaces, data as a context, and so forth? This isn't this isn't the work that a data scientist should be doing. So, and this is one of those points, right? We always talk about that 80-20 rule, the data wrangling, right? And honestly, I have to say, I in the past couple of years, I've kind of got a little bit annoyed with this term of data cleaning and data wrangling, because it's treating data as if it were grunt work. I've actually heard people talking about data janitorial work. And I'm like, wait, we're not treating data with the respect it deserves. We're treating it, we have to go clean it like a janitor. The work to be able to generate reliable data is understanding the ecosystem between the people, between the data, and the actual tasks and processes within this organization. It is about communicating and documenting the knowledge about how people think about it. We always say, well, this one word can mean multiple things to different people. Do we actually document that? And do we know that? And we said, oh, there's 3 definitions. How do we know that there's 3? Maybe there's 5, and we just don't know about them. This vital knowledge work that I'm talking about is at the heart of a data-driven organization, or I should say, should be at the heart. And I really ask, I plead, please ask yourself if you are doing this type of knowledge work. So we're seeing this evolution, right? A data engineer, the data scientist. So who is responsible for creating and managing this reliable data? And our point is that the role of the knowledge scientist. The knowledge scientist is responsible. And with that, let me pass it on to my colleague George, who will talk more about the knowledge scientist.
Thanks, Juan. So who is this knowledge scientist, right? So as Juan has indicated, who's responsible for reliable data? So this is a new role that we're positing should be highlighted and recognized for this fundamental, it's at the heart of the work of data work, right? So the knowledge scientist is the role that it's the bridge builder between data, people and their organizational requirements, questions, and needs, right? So the context of the data work. And this is a role that understands and documents knowledge from users, data scientists, data engineers, and their environment. And ultimately, the goal is reliable data for data-driven organization, for data-driven innovation. Next slide, please. Yeah. So a knowledge scientist has a foot in multiple worlds, right? So at kind of an extreme, knowledge science is both people work, right? So it's about data and context, grounded in shared meaning, as Juan was highlighting. And knowledge science, on the other hand, is also technical work, right? It's about maintaining and keeping accessible and cleaning data, right? So it's safeguarding the actionable, trustworthy, and timely data. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the knowledge scientist is this intermediary, this bridge between the world of, let's say, techne and praxis, right? So the world of technical work, data engineering, stewardship, creating ETL pipelines on the one hand, and on the other, the analyst, the domain scientist, the data scientist, those who have and understand the business or the organization, and they have needs, right, to answer critical questions in their contexts. Next slide, right? And so as a communication bridge and having a foot between the people world and the technical world, this is a person who's kind of, using both their left brain half of the day and their right brain the other half of the day. Right? And so we see already, if we look at in our organizations, we see the rise of roles who are taking on aspects of knowledge science work. So an up-and-coming sort of a role that we're hearing more about is that of the data product manager between the data engineers and the ETL developers, and as a bridge to the data analysts, the BI developers, and the data scientists. Right? And just as we have culture for software, right? We have notions such as agile software development and culture around proper documentation of software. We also need to drive forward the culture of data culture. We need agile data development. We need to think about, next slide please, yes, documentation for our most important data, right? The data itself, documentation for data transformation workloads, documentation even for, say, SQL and SQL scripts, right? And culture around data review, just as we have culture around code review and in, say, system software support for doing review of software, right? So if you think about, as Juan was indicating at the very beginning, the rise of the role of the data scientists opens all kinds of opportunities for innovation, both in education and in research and in practice, right? So questions for students in this new space of innovation, for them it's important, what's the next cool thing? Where are the hard questions and problems where I can make a difference in the world? Where are there opportunities to be a leader, make impact, so make impact in practice and in industry, but also societal impact and scientific impact? If we turn to the universities, right, so the two questions for universities are, is this new, right? Is knowledge science new in terms of research? And if we look, managing knowledge is one of the oldest topics, probably goes back to Aristotle if we think about it. Right, so there is a lot of prior work, that we can build on. There are shoulders that we can stand on. Work in areas of knowledge engineering and knowledge acquisition and knowledge bases, but in the past this has been primarily for handcrafted, human expert-driven knowledge on small data. And if we think about the societal and technical context that Juan sketched for us in the space of big data and commodified AI and the digital transformation of our organizations, we're now looking at knowledge at extreme scale and data-driven organizations in human context. There's a huge space of new research challenges. And in terms of education, universities must continually ask themselves, are we preparing our students for the next wave, right? So in this case, in data science, information science, informatics, computer science programs, are we preparing our students for the next data wave? What are the implications for program design? Are these extensions and evolutions of pre-existing curricula, or are we talking about completely new programs?
And I'll wrap up here as for the industry and data professionals, we always say data is the new oil. But are we actually treating data with the respect it deserves? Are we treating data as a product? And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing now getting much more popularity, treating data as a product. There's these new roles. Who is responsible for your data? Does your organization already thinking about a data product manager and knowledge scientist? And finally, are you hiring the best talent? Will the best talent want to work in a place where you don't treat data as a product, you don't treat data as with respect it deserves? I think the new talent is going to go work with places that data, you can hit the ground running with data. So we just started 15 minutes ago with this takeaway. Just a reminder. The big wave is about knowledge, right? Knowledge science is the next thing. The knowledge scientist is about the role that is responsible for the meaning of data, the semantics in a data team. We have these data product managers who are going to be those leaders of those data teams. Students, opportunities to learn for leadership. Universities, there's open research, and are you asking yourself, are we training the next generation? Industry, there's a paradigm shift. To wrap up, join the conversation. Join us at knowledgescientist.org. Here's a couple of questions right there. If you answer yes to a handful of those questions, you're probably not a data scientist. You're a knowledge scientist. With that, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. Juan, I do have a question we've got coming in from an audience member asking about the gap. Speaking about the gap, what can an organization do about the gap between data producers and data consumers? Is the knowledge scientist also a subject matter expert?
So I would argue that the knowledge scientist is that people person. Even if they're not a subject matter expert, they know how to go talk to subject matter experts and understand them and ask the questions, and from there translate those questions, those requirements, understand it, and see where that data is. So when we think about it, they work with both sides of their brains, right? That's the interesting kind of characteristics that a knowledge scientist would have. And part of this is you want to have, they're not alone. You want to have a team, right? This is how we do software too, right? Software, we have a product manager who talks with the business folks to get the requirements to translate it to the software engineers. We need to start thinking about data that way.
Thank you very much, and indeed thank you for your questions. We're going to go on to our next speakers, and of course do keep those questions coming in. Our next section is going to look at creating a corporate reference data management policy for the European Commission, something of course we're very interested in here in Brussels. And we're joined by Makx Dekkers, who is an independent consultant, and Willem van Gemert from the Publications Office of the European Union. Gentlemen, can you hear me? Are you ready to go?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Great.
Max, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
We've got Makx
Okay.
and Willem. I think I can hear you, so if we can see your screens, then we will be able to switch over to you.
Great, I can see the screen that Max is sharing. So, hello, I'm Willem van Gemert. I'm the Deputy Head of Unit of the Standardization Unit in the Publications Office, and I'm here with Makx Dekkers. Max?
Hello, I'm Makx Dekkers. I'm an open data expert for the Publications Office of the European Union.
So we will present to you today the policy that we are developing for the European Commission about corporate reference data management, and we are implementing this. So we would like to present that to you more in detail. So maybe to start with a word about the European Commission. Okay, so you know probably that it's the executive body of the European Union, but I don't know if you're aware that in the European Commission you have around 55 services ranging from director generals that deal with specific policy areas, service departments, and executive agencies. So one of these service departments is the Publications Office. So the Publications Office is, on the one hand, a service department of the Commission, but at the same time, we are also an interinstitutional service provider. So we very early on, actually, when in the transition from traditional publishing house to data and information provider, we were confronted with interoperability issues because we kept receiving data, metadata in different formats from our different contractors, different author services, etc. And so we realized that the way forward was to standardize metadata and also reference data. So I saw the question earlier today about what reference data is. So when we speak here about reference data, we mean controlled vocabulary. So standard lists with a list of values can be from simple to, for instance, rich thesauri like Eurovoc with more than 8,000 or around 8,000 multilingual concepts. So if you have in mind these many services in the Commission, you can imagine that there is, in each service, there are different information systems, all have metadata and reference data. And so to find the right reference data is already a challenge. Another issue is if you find reference data to know who is responsible. I mean, Juan mentioned this already also in his previous presentation. Is the information reliable? Is it up to date? I'm looking for a list of countries, but does it reflect the latest state of the art? What we saw is that there are different maturity levels in the different services. We have services that maintain their lists locally on a PC in Excel until full-fledged collaborative systems that use semantic technologies. There are duplication, overlaps, both from data, but also from the effort to maintain this data. And to sum it up, lots of interoperability issues. So with this in mind, we proposed to develop a policy to manage reference data in a corporate way in the Commission. So the idea was to have common principles for the management to create a list with corporate reference data on Commission level and to have a common governance following best practices for this for the maintenance. If the benefits that we expected, so first of all, avoid reinventing the wheel, make reuse, avoid duplication not only of data but also of the effort so be more efficient in the way we maintain the data, improved quality, increased interoperability, and also to have which is very important in the context of the Commission, is to have multilingual publication. So have the reference data available in multiple languages. So just to tell you, we have started working on this policy beginning of last year. We have a draft policy that was endorsed this summer by the Commission top management, and Makx will now present you more in detail the content of the policy.
Okay, thank you, Willem. So the content of the policy that Willem just said that was endorsed last year, and you find on the bottom here the link to the policy where it will be, Willem tells me, at the end of the day today. And the idea was that, as Willem said, to make the existing reference data asset accessible and reusable, because there is a lot information, a lot of resources already at the Commission. And with doing that, also the policy tries to encourage the use of corporate interoperable tools for reference management. That is something that is important for doing that, and that stimulates the reuse of reference data across the Commission. And here, one of the things that we have in the policy is that there is a comply or explain policy. So the corporate assets that are agreed should be used by everybody in the Commission that has a use for it, unless there is a real good reason not to do that. So that's sort of a central aspect of the policy. And then there is an establishment of a corporate governance for reference data, so that the governance is done transparently, and that also includes a common management approach for reference data, so that you know what is happening with metadata, with the reference data assets, and you can find that information for your needs. Just a couple of words about the governance that are in the policy. And you can see there are sort of 3 layers of the governance: the strategic level, the management level, and the operational level, and also 2 columns here. In the middle, you have the corporate level, and then on the right-hand side, you have the Directorate General or service level. And the idea is that these existing assets that we're bringing together under the policy, in most cases already have a governance structure. So there might be an existing strategic committee that instructs an existing management committee of how to do things, and the management committee has an operational unit that actually responsible for making it happen. Now, on the corporate level, what we have added is basically a coordination level. So the strategic level is provided by the Information Management Steering Board, the IMSB, a top-level board at the Commission, and the work that we've done for the policy is done by the Corporate Reference Data Coordination Group. The idea is that there is a link between the existing management committees and the Corporate Reference Data Coordination Group, where the existing management committee informs the coordination group, and the coordination group, as the name says, coordinates the work across different management committees for the different assets. And one important thing that the Corporate Reference Data Coordination Group provides is a set of best practices that can be used by operational units that actually do the work for these various assets. So the important thing is to make sure that there is a corporate governance level that connects to existing governance structure, so that the coordination is ensured and things happen in the way that is common and transparent. So, and I said the role of the coordination group is also to provide best practices, and that is something that we've worked on over the last couple of months. And a number that I wanted to just show to you, 10 of them that we have currently in the policy and we have developed further. The first one is availability. If you have corporate reference assets, then people need to be able to access them and to find out what they are. So they need to be available, maybe 24/7. It depends a little bit on what the usage is of a particular asset, but certainly there needs to be sufficient performance and resilience. On communication and notification, we think it's very important that the users are always informed about the changes and releases in timely fashion, because users might need to incorporate them into their systems. The extensibility aspect is important because if you have a central corporate reference data asset, there might be a need for users to add little things to it, either local concepts, but also enrich the information, like translation of labels for particular cases and usage notes, for example, for the terms in a reference data asset. For the feedback and request handling, it is important that there is a channel by which users can ask for changes and give comments on the quality and the content of the reference data. And for the identifiers, it is important that all those data assets that are corporate and the concepts in those data assets have persistent and resolvable identifiers. Furthermore, we have developed a metadata profile for the description of the corporate assets based on the DCAT application profile for data portals in Europe in such a way that it actually is interoperable with that application profile, and in principle the reference data assets could be included in the information in a data portal. For release, versioning, and archiving, the important part of the best practice is that those things, release schedules, versioning approaches, and archival policies are defined and published. Then the 2 things of the reuse of reference data, as I said earlier, in the policy, we have a comply or explain policy for the reuse of internal reference data. So everybody within the Commission should use the ones that are corporate unless there is a really good reason not to. And for the reuse of external reference data, which is also something that happens, of course, information that is available outside of the Commission that could be incorporated into the data descriptions at the Commission and there the rule or the recommendation is to only use trustworthy sources, which is actually what people are doing. For example, using information that is published by the United Nations, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. Those are the kind of things that we're developing. Those are the kind of best practices that we have, and that is something that we're going to further develop. I'll hand over back to you, Willem. You're muted, Willem.
Sorry. So we have established the first list of what we call corporate reference data assets. So on purpose, we have started really small with just 10 assets. We know that there are much more, but the idea was we first want to gain experience with managing them, and then we can extend the list. So we have identified a couple of generic assets for which there was no discussion about the source, what is the reference source. So this ranges from code lists on around currencies, EU programs, to classics such as Eurovoc or the NACE classification and the Inspire themes. We also have taken as an example some which are domain specific. So this is from DG Mare, so about fish species, fishing gear, so very specific to a domain, but again to illustrate what exists, and the idea is to extend this to other domains in the near future. So I think what is really important and what we want to share with you is what we have learned during this exercise. So I think first of all, what is really important is to have support from your top management. So to have a sponsor that supports this your enterprise. Second thing is a question of momentum, the right moment. We have been working on this since many years. We have tried to establish it, but it never really took off. And that changed last year when there was, we heard the striving for a data-driven organization. Well, the Commission is striving to become a data-driven organization. There is a policy for, there's a data strategy. And in this context, the importance of managing reference data became apparent. And now, so it was the right momentum. Another important aspect, we are not doing this alone. So we have behind us, there is, we work very close together with a group of representatives from the different services, and it's a group of real practitioners. And I think that is really key element. It's not people that have been nominated to participate in a working group to be an official representative. They know what they're talking about. They have their hands in the dirt. They're real practitioners. And also the colleagues that are co-chairing this group, and so I'm co-chairing this together with two other colleagues for the time being. We are from different services, and we actually complement each other very well. So it is this complementary aspect that I think also makes it possible to drive this initiative forward inside the Commission. And then I think what was also very important was the support from Makx in this case, not only for his expertise, but also because he was able to really dedicate his time on writing on the policy, without disturbance from other activities. One of the characteristics of our approach was to really keep it pragmatic, start small, gain experience, and then get the ball rolling. So we are still in this pragmatic approach. Linked to this is also the what we want to do is to first, what we saw is important is to first define what the process is. So for instance, we are now looking into additional candidates to become corporate assets. So while doing so, we say, okay, what is the process to analyze a vocabulary if it suits to be a corporate reference data asset? Define this process, and once we have defined this, we can test it on some other examples, and then when it works, then we can really start expanding it. And an important final point is awareness raising. We have, Makx mentioned the comply or explain policy. We have seen already the first examples because the organization is aware of this obligation. They are consulting the coordination group for questions about reference data. So this is very closely linked to the awareness raising in the organization. So Makx, I give the floor back to you for the next steps.
Yes, so as Willem said, we have a pragmatic approach, but of course there's always more work to do. So we have also a list of things that we still want to do. Willem also already said that we have this current set of agreed corporate reference data assets, and we're looking at a way and the process to identify additional assets and adding them to the list. The implementation of the policy, of course, as always, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So what we're trying in the next period is to develop the implementation experience based on the best practices. So see what needs to be done to make this work. There's the candidate tools for corporate use is something that we're looking at also in cooperation with other services at the Commission to see what kind of requirements there are for tools to manage the corporate reference data, raising awareness and promoting the implementation of the policy amongst Commission services. And important also, as the policy was adopted in the middle of last year, this year we're also going to evaluate the policy in terms of the observed benefits, because that's of course also an important part of raising awareness, to be able to show to people that the benefits are actually result from the implementation of the policy. So what we want to do now is we want to have a short discussion with the group, and we have two questions here. The first question that we want to raise here is that we'd like to hear from the audience of how you can convince people throughout an organization, policymakers, data stewards and users, that a mature approach towards reference data management is important and that it provides benefits. So is there any comment from the floor? Willem, you want to say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I think we are frequently confronted with. Only last week, I had a service who, we presented the corporate policy to them. And I think in a way, it's also linked to our second question. They say, yeah, okay, but if we adhere to this, this leads to what you say, Makx, you use this phrase, interoperability leads to interdependence. So we are no longer independent. And so it is really a challenge to get people on board to see the benefits of managing reference data following common principles. So we would be very interested to hear from the audience, what their experience is, what they can share with us. And we can also, if we don't have the time today, we are Makx and I are also available for one-to-one sessions during the conference.
Anyone wants to put some ideas up, either in the chat? Yeah, Gudrun,
yes,
you can
hello,
unmute yourself. Yes.
Yes, it's many years now that I've been working on trying to get the European Commission and many organizations to understand the importance of interoperability, and then directly and related to that, of course, reference data management, because what's the purpose of semantic interoperability if not to basically use the amount of information that is there within the European Union to make it better? There are always two options: the improving of the EU as well as the economic side. There are vast amounts of savings to be done in administration by not having to find things that could be derived from the information in any type of legacy data that you have. That's a time-saving scenario. But I think the most important of all is the political scenario, because cross-border semantic interoperability can achieve a different way of managing the European Union And that is like the holy grail of the entire effort.
Okay, thank you. So what you're basically saying is there needs to be, as Willem said earlier, there needs to be support from the higher levels down. So needs to be a political decision that those things are important to make sure that an organization moves that way, in that direction. Okay, anyone else?
I also see, Max, that there is a question about if you can describe the DCAT metadata profile or suggest further reading. Well, I know that you are, the question is.
Yeah, so going into the profile is a little bit too deep for the minutes that we have. But what we basically did is we worked together with the group of experts in the coordination group to try and find a very simple way of describing the assets so that they can be integrated into a data portal. We wanted to be the profile to be completely compliant with the DCAT AP for data portals, and we did that. And I think what we want to do is very soon we want to publish what the profile is.
So in the presentation, you will find a link. So under this link, we will publish the draft policy, and the idea is there then to also make links to the vocabularies that exist already publicly, such as on EU vocabularies. But there we could also then publish the draft metadata profile, which is based on the DCAT AP standard.
Okay. One question about the tools that I see here, and that is something that we're looking at. What are the current tools? There are various different tools in different places at the Commission. So what we're first trying to do now is come up with sort of a common set of requirements for corporate tools to be able to identify which ones are the ones that could be used on a corporate scale.
So I think there it could be interesting just to mention, because I think the question can also be linked to the first presentation, but I think it's interesting to mention two tools in particular that have been financed with ISA Square money and that are still developed, which is the registry, which is developed by the colleagues from the JRC and used in the Inspire context. And there is VocBench, which is a tool for vocabulary management, both ontologies, but also reference data. And this is where the Publications Office coordinates this in collaboration with the University of Rome, and this is an open source solution. You can find both of these tools on JoinUp, the interoperability platform.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I thank you very much for your insight and for taking those questions which we have coming in via our chat here online. We're going to move now on to our next speaker, who is going to tell us about the Language Metadata Table, LMT. So joining us from MESA, we have Yonah Levenson. Yonah, are you there? Yonah, I don't think we can hear you. It's the catchphrase of the year. I think you're on mute.
Here we go. How about that?
Great.
All right, let me share my screen and start. I think, are you? All right, you guys are sharing. Okay. Okay, you're going to let me share my screen. Thank you. So I'm Yonah Levenson, and I am I'm the manager of metadata strategy and taxonomy governance at Warner Media. I am the founder of LMT and the current working group co-chair. And also along the lines, based on what I've heard so far with this conference, I think it's worth mentioning that I'm also the co-founder, co-director of the Rutgers University Online DAM Digital Asset Management Certificate Program, which touches on a lot of points that I've heard so far. The slides also will be available later, and the links are included in the notes. So how did LMT start? I was at a meeting at HBO, which is now part of Warner Media, and the data architect is sitting in the corner of the room going, what code are we going to use for Spanish as spoken in Latin America? And we started doing a hunt and found out that we had multiple codes, SPA-LA, LATAM SPAN, LAS, and there were other ones in there. And me being in charge of metadata, this like made me a little bit crazy. So I said, okay, we're going to standardize on the language codes throughout HBO. And because this is, I don't want to spend any more time on this. So we started working on it. I thought it would take a few months. I was working with my team, and it ended up taking 16 months. And we ended up with 128 languages. MESA, the Media Entertainment Support Association, heard about this, and they said, would you like to share this at a conference? I said, sure. And people were really excited because it solves, the language metadata table solves a lot of problems that they were experiencing. And so they asked to make it a metadata, an industry standard for media and entertainment. And here we are today with an existing standard. So back in 2017, so there's all this stuff that's happened, and now it's, you guys can read this, 2021, we're up to version 3.03. We have 239 languages to date, and there are more coming. Here's our mission statement. And so what we really wanted to do was make sure there was a unified source of reference data. So just like the previous presentation, except this is only focused on language codes. And the initial focus really has been on media and entertainment. We adhere to IETF BCP 47, and I'll be going into that a little bit more. But we really wanted to make sure we had something that was going to work for lots of, any place we needed this, language codes. So here is a subset of the language metadata table working group members and contributors. So it takes a village. You know, this is not one person or a few people or a single organization sitting up in a ivory tower saying, let's use this code. No, we have everything is vetted and approved by people in the working group to make sure that we are, whatever is proposed is going to work for people in different parts of, in different organizations. Advantages of adopting the language metadata table. Again, we have the working committee that provides the check and balances across the industry. And by having, we also make sure that there's standardized distinctions between spoken and written languages. Also, one of the wonderful things is by having, again, really reference data or consistent metadata codes that are used between the service providers, the clients, the content owners, the content creators, there's no surprises. If you see a code that says ES-419, you know it means Latin American Spanish. So one of my policies is always don't reinvent the wheel, which I also heard earlier today, and strive for consistency. Also, one other piece of advice is that one piece of metadata per field. So by distinguishing between the spoken, the audio, and the written or the textual visual languages, something you see with your eyes, we're able to make sure that the right information exists or is presented when needed. So the scope of the language metadata table is purely language. We only focus on language. People have asked us, what are you going to do next? And it's like, we have enough going on with languages. So languages only, we have their focus on the audio, what we hear, and then the notation of the script or writing system, so the text. One of the other fields that we also include in the language metadata table are endonyms, so the language name in the country's language, so Français as well as in English. So this way, it's easier for people to recognize, especially when there's multiple different kinds of alphabets or different ways of having the notation. And we covered that. Why do we need the language metadata table? So I'll keep on, hitting that drum. We need to identify what's the audio, what can you hear, what are you going to see with your eyes, what's the written or the text, and listed in here are the different kinds of written values or written languages that people would end up reading, also including accessibility, because that is certainly, I know it's very important. I believe it's law in some places in the European Union. It's becoming more prevalent here in the United States as well. Also, when one is doing licensing or rights and signing legal agreements, it's good to know what languages are included. You generally need to include that. So if you want to be very specific and include codes, you got them. They're here. The other thing is, just because I'm in the media and entertainment space, I've also worked in publishing, educational publishing, legal publishing, and other kinds of organizations. And I know that there's also a need to have languages for audiobooks or for clips. Like if you're putting something, a pronunciation guide, you're going to have something embedded in the text, etc. So by including what languages are being used and whether it's written, again, the visual or the audio, it can be used everywhere. I've also had queries about it from a web user interface perspective. So this way, then the proper languages could also be included from that way. So you put the code in, and then if somebody selects what language they want to see in their UI, they're able to do that as long as you set it up properly. And again, we have this for 239 languages so far. We adhere to the IETF BCP 47, and one of their guiding principles is to use the shortest code possible. So we have gotten queries from other folks saying, well, what about this code? And again, we go back to a standard because I don't like to reinvent the wheel, and we use the shortest code possible. IETF BCP 47 is the Internet Engineering Task Force, best current practice number 47. It is a standard of standards adhering to ISO standards, such as the language codes and the country codes. And one of the differences, though, because I found at HBO, just having a country code was not enough because we also had territories such as Latin America. So by using the UN territory codes, which is compliant with IETF BCP 47, and once again, a standard of standards, we now had the flexibility to identify the different geographic locations that we needed to include. One of the fun things about IETF BCP 47, there are over 40,000 possible combinations. However, 40,000 combinations can mean 40,000 combinations. And if you're trying to make sure that if you're the content creator and you're distributing out your content, you want to make sure those who are receiving it are using the proper code. So by having a table, which is the language metadata table, constrained and said these are the acceptable configurations of IETF BCP 47, it takes away the guesswork. This is an example of a language, just a few rows from the language metadata table standard. So in here, I have an example of just generic English using EN. Here's one of my favorite examples, which is Spanish as spoken in Latin America. So ES-419, with 419 being the UN territory code. We've also had some interesting discussions with Serbian, where you can see over here the visual language tag that for Serbia, Latin and Cyrillic have equal weight. There is no one that is preference over another. So we made sure that the LMT allowed for both. So again, here's our display language in Latin script, and here it is over here with the display name. Mandarin, another interesting example, because that's your audio language, whereas written Chinese is only 2 flavors, simplified and traditional. So again, we allow for those down here with the visual language tag. And there's other examples here as well. We also include a number of sign languages. So the language metadata table, where we meet pretty regularly, probably anywhere between 7 and 9 times a year at a minimum, plus conferences or whatever. Right now, we have a request for over 150 additional languages. The sources for those requests come from Warner Media, Viacom, and Disney, among others. So I have a resource through MESA who is doing the this is a student in getting his master's in library and information science, and he was my intern for a while. He's working through the request, doing a big cross map and making suggestions of the codes. Actually, back here, we also have the different language groups when there may be more than one language in a particular area. So he's doing this huge cross mapping effort to see where things fall. We also have some requests with regards to Chinese. There are additional audio codes that are being requested, and there's also a request to just completely separate the text, the visual, traditional and simplified Chinese from the audio and not include them at that point. We also have another huge project going on with these are all subcommittees, languages of the Indian subcontinent, where Cube Cinema, who is an Indian-based company, is working on the language group codes and the language codes for somewhere between 50 and 65 languages, I believe, because they are experts in languages of the Indian subcontinent. It's really wonderful that they're stepping up to the plate, and they will continue to submit, to give submissions for the approval. So why are we even here in the first place? MESA, the Media Entertainment Support Association, agreed to sponsor LMT in the first place. As things continued and there became more interest in different areas from different organizations, SMPTE, the Society for Motion Pictures and Television Engineers, which is an internationally recognized standards organization, became also interested because they were also trying to solve the language problem for SMPTE and said, hey, we'd like to, help sponsor. And so they're going to be the technical arm, the technical part of the LMT. So this is how things are broken out. So MESA owns like the adoption guidelines, the templates, the resources, and the sources for the published materials. All of our working groups are done with MESA support, and SMPTE is working on the tools and infrastructure, and we're going through their standards processes now. There's also a validation tool that has been developed, and I'll talk about more about that in a moment. And there's also some additional standard partners that are agreeing to adopt LMT, and this is just a small group of those as well. We'd love to include your names in here too. From the SMPTE perspective, we're partnering with Bruce Devlin, the SMPTE Standards Vice President. And so in order to get LMT adopted by SMPTE, it has to go through their technical committee number 30 for the metadata registry. And it's currently in the initial approval stage. It's about 10% of the way through the process. And the validator link is available in the slides. So resources and links, if you have any questions about the LMT, you can reach out to me and also to Meg Morrissey, who is now of Netflix. We are the co-chairs, and that email lmt@mesaonline.org will come directly to us. Links for the codes, the current 239 codes are available from the MESA online link. I also thought you all would be interested in the different links for the validation tools that we have. And those are included there. I'm just going to quickly, I do have in the appendix the full mission statement, the anatomy of how it's constructed, and explanations of the table columns. And I just want to thank you. I don't know if we have a couple minutes for questions, but I would love to answer whatever I can.
Thank you very much, Yonah. I think we'll just go for a quick one rapid fire question to keep on time. But how is the LMT effort working with other actors in the reference data area?
I believe that it's people are starting to get more information that the LMT even exists, and opportunities like this to speak at ENDORSE and other conferences, such as the Taxonomy Bootcamp in London, where we were nominated for best taxonomy practice. As the word gets out, then people see, they go and they look at the code, they determine whether it's appropriate for their use. And that's how the adoption will start. I also think as it goes through the SMPTE process and the validation tool will become formally released, then folks can go up and get that code off of GitHub and incorporate it into their processes so that the codes themselves are validated.
Thank you very much, Yonah. That was fascinating. We will keep an eye out. As you said, you've shared all those links and people will be able to interact with you through various means as we go forward over the next 4 days, but also into the future. So thank you very much for that. Now, I would like to remind the audience once again that we do want this to be very interactive. We want people to share on social media. Please do use that hashtag #ENDORSE2021. And I'm going to remind you again of the Twitter accounts that we'd love you to follow and share. That's EU Law Data Pubs, EU Publications, EU_Open Data, and Eurlex, EURLEX. So we want you to do that. And of course, we do want you to keep putting in the chat your questions, your comments. We will try to get through them. I know we've got a packed schedule today, but that's what we will endeavour to do. I will remind you as well that we will be continuing all week for the whole remainder of the week in the afternoons. You can join. There are several different tracks. Today we have got 2 tracks. We're doing reference data. There is also track 2 happening concurrently where they are looking at solutions. But on other days we even have up to 3 tracks. So there's a huge wealth of information and expertise at your disposal. Now, our next speaker is going to be Rahel Ann Bailey, who is from Content Seriously Consulting. She is an expert and will be telling us about the quest for content in context using standards and semantics for interoperability. Minutes to look at the 8 causes of bad data quality. So stay with us. Welcome back. We are in the home stretch of today's event here on Track 1 at ENDORSE, the European Data Conference on Reference Data and Semantics. But we still have another great speaker for you, as well as a full roundtable panel discussion to come. I did mention we're going to be talking about the 8 causes of bad data quality and what you can do about it. And there to join us, we have Helen Lippell. Helen, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Great, Helen, we can see and hear you. Over to you, the floor is yours.
Right, let me do a share. And is that now working? Yes, working. Cool, thank you. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. Hope you managed to grab a quick coffee or comfort break just then. So this is going to be a really quick fire overview of several projects that I've worked on. Realistically, each one is a talk or a case study in itself, but I've tried to condense it for this format. So as a taxonomy consultant, I see many different kinds of organisations trying to do different things with their data. But this is public sector, not-for-profit, private sector. And I try to help people do more with their stuff, basically using taxonomies, ontologies, and other models. I really, really like sourcing out messy data. So if someone says they've got a problem with bad data, I think, woohoo, that's great. But obviously they need it fixed. I would say, you know, as much as I think taxonomies are fantastic, it's not that taxonomy will fix everything on its own. It's very rarely a one-off or a one-person job to fix data problems that are systemic to an application or an organisation. It's very rarely a technology-only solution. So what I'd really like to kind of emphasise is the role of people, process and culture working alongside all the fantastic progress that we've made in technology and data processing over the last few decades. I'm not saying these are the only solutions to these particular issues, but I hope you'll kind of relate to at least one of them, and it's just to give you a flavour of what is possible. I think in every case, if any of these are happening to you, identify the kind of problem you're dealing with, identify the impact, and then you can start thinking about taking steps to change it for the better. Okay, trying to change the slide. That's not changing. Hello, support people. The PowerPoint's not moving.
Hi. So you
Hi.
cannot share, you cannot change the slide.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Thanks.
no, that's my question. That's your problem that you
Yeah.
shared.
I'm
So
trying to move the deck and nothing's happening, which is not really what I was expecting.
okay, are you sharing in PowerPoint or PDF?
PowerPoint.
Okay, so have you tried to click on your keyboard on the arrow toward the left?
Yep.
Can you try again?
Yep. That's really strange. Very sorry about this.
No worries, I'm gonna ask control and you adjust to confirm and then you tell me when take control.
Yep. So could you click, please? Yeah, go back one. Yeah, so pause one. So sorry about that, everyone. That's never happened before, naturally. So problem one is a lack of agreed definitions for concepts and categories. And this came up for me in an organisation who are a government agency who handle complaints from the general public about financial products and services like credit cards and mortgages. They might feel they've been treated badly or ripped off by an organisation. So this body has teams of people who manage customer inquiries and give information to people to help them resolve these complaints. So to do this, they require in-depth knowledge of the particular financial products that they're dealing with and the market as a whole, and the ability to use that knowledge in order to resolve what can often be very complex complaints. Staff access various resources and databases in order to enable this. But the problem they were having was the main knowledge base they were using had not been maintained and it was suffering from really poor navigation, really badly set up search, so no one could find what they wanted when they needed it when they were trying to deal with a customer. And staff were using slightly different terminology for the same things, or they didn't know what particular financial products were called because they were doing searches for what they thought it might be and it wasn't coming back on the knowledge base. So this meant that customers were getting inconsistent advice, and they weren't always able to get a resolution with the organisations they were dealing with. So what did we try and do? So there was an in-house team and they tried to raise this with the senior management, excuse me, and they'd not really got very far with it. So the bottom-up approach had not worked. So they managed to get some budget for an external group of consultants, including me, to come in and try and persuade senior management from the top down to say, these are the problems you've got, you need to try and address this. We could link the work to a staff reorganisation that was happening, which meant that staff would need to get more skills and knowledge of areas that they hadn't been working with before. So it was a very clear use case for the taxonomy to be improved. So they needed these consistent resources, especially if they were working on brand new areas. So the outcome was reasonably good, that the in-house team got resources to build up that taxonomy and deal with the search issues, so the knowledge base could be vastly improved. Could you progress the slide, please? Thank you. So moving on to number 2. Lack of business processes to manage vocabularies and definitions. I suspect a lot of people suffer from this problem where there's no governance or maintenance in place. This was affecting a global name in the video gaming industry that I was working with. So it's a very complex global organization. The taxonomies I was involved with were used for multi-channel content publishing and for reference data around things like ratings agencies and ratings classifications on video games, because that's a really critical thing to get right. If you get that wrong, it has massive legal implications for an organisation. So content needs to be tagged consistently so it can be surfaced for users who are interested in particular games that the company publishes, or whole genres of games like sports or shoot 'em ups. And they wanted to do a lot around personalization as well. But the problem was governance had not really been looked at. So there were lots of stakeholders for all these taxonomies and lots of competing priorities for, who gets to update what on which taxonomy. And there was just a complete lack of control as to how any of this got managed. So if you've worked with taxonomies or other data, you might be able to imagine some of the chaos that this was causing. So unlike our previous example, in this case, working from the ground up was actually better. So we did a lot of work building relationships with the people who were actually tagging the content day to day to try and understand their needs and to make more use of the knowledge that they had about the customers who were the ultimate end users of the content. Because it's such a big organization, you don't always get that proximity to the actual players. So through working just sort of one person at a time, building those relationships. Hello? Sorry, can someone mute, please? No, go back, please. Thank you. So what we were trying to do was sell the benefits of a more controlled governance framework for the data and the taxonomies and what tags they were going to be working with. So it's less about constraining them, but more about helping them reduce inconsistency, duplication, and a lot of overlap in the taxonomy terms so that they would feel more comfortable and more engaged with the process, and ultimately the customer benefits. Okay, you can move on to the next one, please. Thank you. Oh, no, 3, please. Thanks. Okay, so moving on to number 3. So this problem is, again, a little similar to what we've seen, different audiences using different terminology for exactly the same concepts. This is more about end users or the general public or specialist audiences rather than in-house staff. So this organisation is another government agency responsible for training healthcare staff working for the NHS. So there was a need for a taxonomy to tag consistently lots of heterogeneous content that was being made available on the training platform. The content was a mix of text, videos, e-learning modules, and more, provided by lots of different sources, and with, frankly, quite patchy metadata and extra context added to the content in some cases. There were lots of different user groups ranging from small elements of the general public, but more around healthcare professionals who might be really specialist in one area and training to do something else, particularly with all the changes in the healthcare system over the last year with coronavirus. A lot of doctors, nurses, and practitioners have moved around. So the impact of this, not having good metadata and having next to no tagging, was that searching was really difficult. So there was user confusion because there wasn't a consistent information architecture. And there's lots of different ways that you can design an IA for a healthcare training platform. And it's very hard to please everybody. What we observed was there was different levels of terminology used for the same things. Like someone who's an epidemiologist would know the exact scientific name for the coronavirus, but the general public just knows it as coronavirus. They probably use it synonymously with COVID-19, even though they're not technically the same thing. So you've got a recipe for chaos. And also you've got things like medical equipment that people needed to be trained on, and some users have got extremely sophisticated knowledge of that equipment. Others just want to put in ventilator and get exactly what they want from the search. So as a result of all of this, the platform overall was having less impact than the organisation wanted, because users were having difficulty finding what they needed or even just understanding what was available. So what they needed to do and this was quite a kind of big shift for them, was an enterprise taxonomy which mapped together these disparate uses of terminology and language. It had to recognize that end users would use coronavirus and COVID synonymously, even though they're not the same thing. But it also had to recognize that people wanted to search for the scientific name for this and, all the variants. So we started by identifying the key facets that were common to all or most content. And then we seeded each facet with a few terms. And then over a period of a few months, they built it up to something a lot more robust and usable and started applying it to content. They worked with experts at all the different kind of audience levels. So this has made a big difference to findability, and there's less times when someone will hit a complete dead end because they've tried all the searches and they still can't find what they need. Very quick water break. Can we move on to next number 4, please? Thank you. So number 4. The domain of the data is not fully understood by the organisation and its customers, and that's not meant to be a judgment on customers, but as you'll see, it was causing problems. So this no longer exists, a government organisation responsible for producing digital information for the general public in the UK to get information on a huge range of government services and policies. It's actually the predecessor to the current one, if any of you've ever seen it. So a very detailed taxonomy had been developed by me for use in various bits of the site functionality, particularly around the search interface, so filters, facets, a lot of use of synonyms, and for auto suggestions to try and do that process of guiding people, especially because people don't really enjoy working on looking at government websites. It's not as fun as sort of shopping or watching Netflix, so they don't want to have to think too much. Because the range of information was so big, the organisation struggled to develop a coherent information architecture, yet again, that worked for all users. And all users means the entire British population. Search satisfaction was low because users' queries around particular policies or information that they were looking for did not necessarily match how government officially described it. And all governments love jargon and really complicated ways of phrasing things. So users didn't want to have to understand or remember that really complicated phrase. They just want, what they want. So all this, when we sort of looked at this, it sounds really obvious, but I needed to understand the domain better before I could help anybody else. I needed to work closely with the other teams, particularly around user researchers. There was a really good user research function, the content designers, the search analytics for all the quantitative data around searches and user journeys, in order to better inform the taxonomy development. So it couldn't just be a really academic exercise. It had to be informed by all these different sources of information about our end users. And so the taxonomy helped, again, bridge a gap in terminology between senior management who wanted to get out particular messages or use the jargon, and the user need to just get their task done and get on with their day. So the taxonomy helped by mapping a lot of that stuff together, as I say, informed by a lot of that user analysis. Move on to number 5, please. So we've talked a lot about different levels of vocabulary used by different groups, but this is a slightly different problem in that language itself is ambiguous. And I'm talking about English because that's the one I've used throughout my career, but I'm sure all languages have their ambiguities and things that people can get wrong. So this was a publisher of business information who were creating data feeds of news sources that could be queried by end users, mostly organizations, companies, financial organizations, and they could query against things like company names, topics, industry sectors, and a lot more other metadata attributes. So the selling point for this was quality, timeliness, and relevance. And where my work came in was supporting the automatic classification. I wouldn't call it machine learning because it didn't really learn, it just did what it was told. But we were trying to do a lot of automatic tagging at scale. So as with the health content, we were dealing with a lot of heterogeneous sources, an awful lot of unstructured data, and it's really hard to optimize tagging for hundreds of different kinds of unstructured data. Like you might have a feed coming from a newspaper in India versus, a UK newspaper or American press releases about the oil sector. It was just too much to do fine tuning on each source. So the auto tagging wasn't that smart. Just as one example, it kept getting confused between Apple, the tech company, and content about orchards and the fruit industry that was coming in from news sources around the agricultural sector. And for a human, that's pretty easy to work out which is which, but computers are a little bit dumb sometimes. It wasn't just getting confused by proper names, it was also getting confused by just normal phrases in language. So one that we had particular trouble with, because both of these concepts were coming through in the content, was rights issues, which is a particular way. Yeah, okay, sorry, I've seen your message. I can, let me finish this one and then move on to the summary, if that's all right. Is that what you want me to do?
Yes, I just wanted to wrap it up so that we can move on to the round table. If you've got a couple of more slides left, just let's go through them quickly.
Yeah, I've got 2 more slides and one sort of wrap up one.
Let's skip on to the wrap up one then.
Yeah, okay, so can we move on 4 slides, please? Okay, so very sorry we haven't managed to get through all 8 causes. Very happy to continue the conversation over Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm also a member of a thing called the Search Network, which is a global network of people who love to talk about search and taxonomies and metadata and all that good stuff. I'm also the chair of something called Taxonomy Bootcamp London, which Yonah was kind enough to mention earlier. Let me, 30 more seconds, please. Don't cut me off just yet. So I hope I've convinced you through some of these very quick stories that data quality is an issue for all kinds of organisations and projects, regardless of what they're actually trying to do. More data is being created than ever before, but not always being maintained in an optimal way. So as I said at the beginning, name your problem. You might have more than one issue. Name the impact, especially if it's a private sector company that wants to make money and they can't because no one can find their staff. Well, make sure they know that. Attack it with a clear strategy, so you can't fix everything at first. So just start with priorities, tie into business objectives, whether those are commercial, whether it's public sector that has, government objectives, or improving staff knowledge so they can give better service to the products and customers, or creating new value propositions, because you can do more interesting things once you know what your data actually is. Yeah, please do carry on the conversation on these channels. Thank you very much for bearing with me.
Thank you very much, Helen, indeed. I'm sorry we had to rush you towards the end there. But we are wrapping up today's track one with a full roundtable panel where you will hear from several high-level speakers. You can see their names all on the screen. They're going to be talking about filing plans, reference data from the past, or bridge to auto-classification. And I'm going to hand over now to moderate that from the European Commission to Seth van Hooland.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. So indeed, it has been a busy afternoon with lots of PowerPoint slides. So we'll do our best to make this or to mimic as good as possible an actual conversation between 6 experts from different large international, both public and private organizations to discuss filing plans. And so in a moment, I would say the experts will present themselves. Actually, I started sharing a slide deck, which I would need to use. I think the one which is being showed now is a different one. Like if I'll just, voila. Perfect. And I just need to jump here in full screen mode. Perfect. So the whole objective of today is to get the view of 6 experts on the topic of filing plans. But before giving the floor to the, let's say, 6 experts during a tour de table, I'm guessing that many of you will perhaps already have a year-long experience with filing plans in the context of records management projects or information governance. But somehow I'm expecting that there might be also people who perhaps just want to learn more about filing plans and who are a little bit less knowledgeable about the topic. So before giving the floor to the experts, I'll perhaps just very briefly introduce the whole notion of a filing plan. And so within, I would say, the kingdom of reference data, filing plans are a bit of a unique animal. And so in a way, they provide a classification of the activities of an organization. And so this covers both operational activities like HR, financial management, but also, I would say, more business-related activities such as policy development. And so as you see here on this slide, a filing plan is often represented as a hierarchical tree. And in that way, it produces a very condensed view of what an organization actually does. But so how does this whole, I would say, workflow pan out on the terrain? Actually, as you see here on the slide, it all starts on the left-hand side with what you see as being represented here, a document, but it could be also very much a piece of data or a piece of paper. So here you could just think about an email or, let's say, a financial contract. And so the moment when we move over a document into a file, by making that step, we turn the document into a record. And so a file or a dossier in French actually brings together all individual records which relate to the same business activity. And this is then exactly the moment where you see the link with the filing plan, which actually models from a hierarchical perspective the whole set of different, I would say, functions of an organization. And so on the right-hand side, you see also the connection with what is called here the common retention list, or in many organizations, you have a set of standardized retention rules. And so it's important to understand that actually a filing plan and the retention list, they're like a brother and a sister holding hands. And so it's actually the filing plan which allows you to say, okay, this file contains records which were produced in that specific business activity, and therefore I'm going to attach the following retention rules. And so, for example, this workflow allows you to say, okay, financial, or I have a file containing records on a financial contract. our retention rules stipulate that we're going to keep this file for 10 years after its closure, and after the 10-year period, the file will be moved to a historical archive. Or on the other hand, if you have a file containing non-retained tenders, then you might have a retention rule saying we'll only keep that file for 2 years, and after 2 years, we're going to destroy the file. So I would say this was perhaps the world's shortest crash course into a filing plan and records management, but I assume that many of you have already a background in that context. I just wanted to sketch a little bit the bigger picture and to make sure that everyone understands exactly how we should position a filing plan and to already understand a little bit the link with the retention rules. But I'm sure that the experts that we have today will talk more on this. And so I'm terribly happy that we managed to bring together this wonderful team of people who will entertain you this afternoon with high-level advice and some stories about how they have been using filing plans across their organizations. And I think traditionally we always give the floor first to people who have traveled the furthest. So I'm very happy that we managed to get Prisca Giordani, who is now the Chief Officer in charge of the Information Governance and Records Management Bureau at the IMF. And so Prisca is currently based in Washington. So Prisca, I hope that you hear me correctly. And so if you could perhaps introduce yourself during 2 or 3 minutes and then hand the floor to Bernice from the European Central Bank, who can then present herself, and then we can go through the list of speakers in that way. Prisca?
Of course, Seth. Can you hear me well?
Loud and clear.
Excellent. So good afternoon. For me, good morning. My name is Prisca Giordani. I'm delighted to be here with you all today. I am a records manager and archives professional and have been working in the field for over 20 years for many international organizations, including the European Commission, which I actually left 2 years ago to move to Washington, D.C., where I am currently working, as Seth was mentioning, at the International Monetary Fund. Here I am the lead of the Information Governance and Preservation Center of Excellence. Our mission is to contribute to the institution accountability and credibility, ensuring that the fund captures and preserves evidence of its decisions, operations, actions, and transactions. We provide policy, and we also work to ensure that the IMF IT, where we are from an organizational point of view, we do belong to IT, deploy systems that are designed within with the capacity of managing, preserving, and retrieving the records. I will just give another quick 2 seconds on my organization and where we are. Before the pandemic, the fund had started a reflection to work better with limited resources in terms of talent, cost, and funds. And we were looking at ways to provide more quality and value to our membership. As in many other institutions, the pandemic has been a huge accelerator to this type of projects and programs really focused on changing and improving the way we serve our stakeholders. Common denominator of this program is really truly around business processes simplification, streamlining, establishing of more efficient decision-making, and harnessing knowledge, which I think is very much central to the theme of the conference today. I will be speaking later on more, but I will be speaking specifically about a current project that we are delivering with regards to a new document management system. And it is a project that we do in collaboration with the Knowledge Management Unit and Records Management. And I pass to Bernice from European Central Bank. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prisca. It's really an honor and a privilege to be amongst you today here at this virtual roundtable. My name is Bernice Ibirico. I'm from the European Central Bank. I'm an information management specialist. And to give you a bit of context, the ECB, or European Central Bank, was established in 1998 with an archive and also with a library. And over the years, obviously, things have developed a lot more in the digital direction. So, of course, things are transforming also for our archives. And came 2003, we obviously realized that paper, we were drowning in paper, basically. And so it was time to prepare ourselves seriously for the digital age, which already for a lot of us started quite early on. So in 2003, a records management program was kicked off, and record managers were recruited, initially many internally, and were qualified through university studies, and at the time mainly through the University of Northumbria, like myself. And a whole records management program was set up, and a single repository of documents and records was also procured at the time. So this has obviously evolved very much into our enterprise content management system, with a whole team of librarians, record managers, and technical specialists over the years to support the system, our end users, our functions, and our business areas. So it's very, very much a team effort. It's directed by the Information Governance Division, and which is part of the Secretariat Business Area of the ECB. And we're basically trying as much as possible to be real pioneers in this field. A lot of work is done over the years since 2008, when we actually established our first business classification, which has evolved now into a real retention schedule, which is almost fully automated, as you'll learn a bit later. So we're very, very proud of that. And to be able to then deliver to our archive colleagues those permanent records that will be serving our European citizens for forever, hopefully. So now I'd like to pass on to Isabel and Constantine of the Council.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Bernice. First of all, I would like to thank you in my personal name, of course, and in the Council, the invitation to participate in this roundtable. I'm from Portugal, and I have I'm in the Council for about 1 year in a project in the Information Management Unit. And we are working in a project that we will explain later on, so I won't lose the time now. And before I in Portugal, I was collaborating in a national project to develop a filing plan for all the public administration. That it's already finished with. It was quite an interesting project. And now I pass the word to Constantine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Constantin Stancu. I'm an information manager at the Council of the EU, more specifically in the Information Management Unit, which is part of the IT Directorate, same as Isabel. And we are, in fact, in the process of building a filing plan and rotation schedule to serve a new registration and filing tool that we want to put in place over here. I also have prior experience in national administration in Romania on validating filing plans for public institutions and ensuring the compliance with the national guidelines, of course. And I also briefly contributed to the process of building a filing plan in another EU institution, or rather a EU body, the European Data Protection Board. And now I pass the floor to Kuldar.
Thank you. I'm Kuldar Ross from the National Archives of Estonia, more specifically from the digital archives of the National Archives. As a public sector National Archives, our role, I suppose, is most quite obvious to everybody. So we are in charge of looking after all the agencies, all the public sector data in Estonia, making sure that agencies keep this data as long as necessary, and then make the selection of what needs to be archived, and then we transfer it to the National Archives and offer reuse and access possibilities. From the digital archives point of view, and even more specifically on the Estonian e-governance point of view, the issue and the question is very much about interoperability. Taking the amount of information which is created in public sector, the questions of assigning retention periods, making sure that there is a common approach to knowing which data needs to be kept, which can be archived, which should be archived, when should it be archived, is actually getting quite a huge task and challenge. And one of my jobs here is also in Estonia to go around the agencies, check their information systems, see if retention management and filing plans are supported decently there, try to synchronize, standardize approaches across institutions, and so on. And my second hat, just to mention here, is also kind of trying to do the same thing on a European level. So I'm also a member of the e-archiving building block, where I'm again trying to bring this interoperability between archives and data producers to a kind of European level. Thank you. And with that, last and certainly not least, to Frederik.
Thank you very much, Kuldar. So I'm Frederik Rosseel. I've been working in digital archiving since '99. So the first project I've worked on was the City Archives of Antwerp. But ever since, I've been working on some 20, 30 projects in digital archiving. So I won't enter into too much detail. Back in 2006, we started docbyte, and from the start, one of our main focal points was digital archiving. So what we created very early on, a solution which is used in archiving by several vendors, DocShifter, which allowed for any-to-any format conversion. And then in 2014, we started developing our own archiving solution. It's we call it an OIS, enabling archiving and ingest solution, which we call SCIO. And next to that, we've been very often working on auto classification and data extraction. That's also since 2015, when we were way too early to market, because the technology only came to maturity in about 2018. We've been working in all types of verticals, ranging from large multinational archiving projects. And that's something that we've seen now with the impact of Corona. For us, unfortunately, to put like that, there's quite a smaller number of archiving projects going on, because the focus is very often now on business critical applications. But what we've seen is for with regard to archiving is companies that are trying to reduce the total cost of ownership. Next to that, we've worked in, for example, in healthcare, where interoperability is also a big issue. But that's, how would I say, in short, what we've been doing over the last 20 years to put it.
Okay, thank you very much, Frederik. And so I hope we convinced everyone of the richness of this panel, spanning a very broad panorama of types of organizations. And so I'll just immediately jump in with the first question. So in total, we have a set of 4 transversal questions, and each time we'll spend about 10 to 12 minutes discussing, I would say, different elements of a filing plan. And just to get started, perhaps it makes sense to first of all talk a little bit about how on earth do you get started? What lessons do you learn from building a filing plan? I think based on the stories that you will hear, very often it involves a form of kind of group therapy, bringing together the responsible from HR, finances, very specific business activities. Of course, all of these people have different views, and all of them think that their activity is the most important one. And so actually creating a filing plan can be quite a challenge and can sometimes take for about 5 or 10 years. But so I think that Prisca is in an ideal situation, perhaps, to be the first to share her experience and stories and anecdotes about how actually a filing plan can be created in an organization. So Prisca, if you're happy to share some insights and stories from your point of view on this question, and of course the other colleagues can jump in once that you shared your experience.
Actually, it just got me scared because, as I told you at the beginning, the story I'm about to tell is not a finished story, and I am getting very worried about the group therapy session and the cost, given the fact that I am in the United States with doctors. So let's hope the therapy session actually works fine. So as I said, I am planning to introduce you here at this session a little bit what is the work that we are doing right now at the IMF. It's still in iteration, so I am not telling you a finalized success story. I'm really telling you what's going on. For us, the introduction of the new document management system has been the opportunity to deeply rethink our file plan. So my idea to start off this roundtable is to tell you the processes that we're going through, and then to share with you some lessons learned and some open questions that might still be interesting food for thought to leave you with. So the current document management system we are using was developed at the IMF in the early 2000s, and it was about time to change it. So we have been discussing internally for many years, even before my arrival, what system to choose and to procure, and we have eventually selected OpenText Content Server 16. Which compared to the previous initial decision is a system that is heavily relying on folder structure and uses both folder structures and metadata. But for us, this was, for our team specifically, this was then the perfect opportunity to rethink and challenge our current records classification to introduce some automated governance on documents, setting up the retention at the folder level and leveraging heavily the metadata inheritance. The idea was that we want that the records of the fund are disposed on time according to IMF retention schedules, and making sure that then we will have an archives of the fund publicly available after 20 years, as it is in our policy. But we want to make sure that we have the least involvement possible of end users when it comes to filing and tagging and providing metadata, because we know for a fact that users are not enthusiastic in doing all this very painstaking work. I think as many of you from the field might be thinking right now, this is easier said than done. And indeed, it is iteratively and extremely intense work. Just to give you a little bit of the setting, the current DM that we have now in place is heavily used by the departmental assistant who have the responsibility to file the records of the fund. However, the rest of the organization, and in particular the economists, which are in a way the key actors at the the fund, have started creating alternative storages and filing structure outside the official record keeping system. And they've been using Box, SharePoint, drives, individual desktop, you name it, creating, of course, a serious threat for security, accountability, and business continuity. The recent explosion of tools such as OneDrive or Teams, to name just a couple, added a growing governance concern. Furthermore, the file plan that was initially applied to the current DM has been heavily customized over the years to reflect the departmental organization structure. And the result is that we had a lot of repetitions, heavy siloed structure of records and information, narrow access, and tunnel vision, if you want, of information with a lot of duplication of efforts and systems. To say it very bluntly, we could be much more efficient than that, and this is the idea and the challenge that we have. With this ex-ante situation, therefore, we want to make sure that the new DM can be efficiently and intuitively serving the users and the organizational needs, encouraging, therefore, a better compliance and possibly providing an easier way for employees across the organization to share and work on ideas together, because I think we are in 2021 and this is the whole idea. We want to collaborate and be more efficient as an organization. You mentioned the roles and the group therapy. So indeed, there is plenty of people doing this session, therapy session. Our team of records managers and archivists works with enterprise architecture and security, with knowledge managers, with business analysts, and key business stakeholders. So we really are bringing together a lot of expertise and a lot of different point of view, and even if you want understanding of what is a records and why it is important to have.
And Prisca, just a quick question. How do you then organize this in practice? Could you then, for example, ask people to bring, or you ask them to do some preparatory homework and to bring some sketches of what they think?
So the preparatory work, we did it. And the way we did it, thank you for asking actually, Seth, because this is really bringing me the opportunity to give you a little bit more on the process. So the records management team started with what we are better at. We did an analysis of the traditional roles, mandate, responsibility of the various departments and divisions, and we basically established in practice, in theory, what would be the expected records to be created. What we did then was to look at the file plans and how the current file plan had been used and implemented. But since we are not blind, we also looked at the fact that the organization and its user had figured out over the years a lot of workarounds and different places where they were storing this information. So we did observe not only the current usage of the file plan, but also where records were residing outside of the file plan and how they were structured and organized. With all this information, we then developed some reflection of the file plan structure that we were about to propose. And we really tried to be as pragmatic as possible as to look at the records with the eyes of the users. So we offered all this. So we did the preparation work, and then we organized stakeholders meetings. And during these stakeholders meetings, the idea was to basically offer them our proposed and suggestion, and then look at very iterative meetings where stakeholders were really asked to interact with us and offer their view and their opinions with regards to the proposed offer. So it was never this is our solution and this is an imposed preset of theoretical file plan structure. This is what you're going to use. This is the initial idea. We bounce it back to you. Give us your input. We will integrate the input. As you can imagine, it is quite time-consuming, and it also obliged us to rethink a little bit our initial approach. As records manager, we were dreaming of implementing a fully functional file plan structure, and reality crashes with the needs of the users. So we basically decided to decouple, if you want, the file plan, the folder structure that we would implement in the system, and that would be directly used by the users from the classification and the retention schedule. That part is behind. It is linked at each folder level, and it is basically working without the user having to worry about it. Because this work that we are doing with the user is exactly to understand the structure of the folders and how that structure maps to our functional classification and retention schedule, but they don't need to know that as long as we understand what is the folder structure. Again, this was long debated, and it was even, if you want, a little bit of, again, a therapy session for the records managers who were involved in this process. But I think at the end of the day, we made the right decision, understanding that we cannot expect everyone to become records managers and obsessed with the records management requirement. We actually need to be giving the user something that is tangible and user-friendly for them. And I think I was reading recently an article from Fiorella Foscarini, who was working at the ECB many years ago. And she was claiming that it's easier for users, I'm quoting here, to classify records using a function-based classification because the classification is based upon the activities that the user performs. Problem is that this presumes that the users understands their activities in the same terms used by the developers at the classification. And this is very, very difficult to achieve. So to wrap it up, basically at the end of this iterative workshop, what we do then is we go back to our restricted circle of workers, and we basically analyze the feedback that we received. to make sure that we incorporate, resolve, or even address. Sometimes there is just technical change management issues that needs to be addressed. And of course, while organizing the folder structure, we are trying to make sure that we incorporate and we look at ways that the file plan interplays with many other taxonomies that are present at the fund, such as the enterprise vocabulary, the topic subject. The last step, but again, we are not yet there, will be that after implementation, we will be monitoring usage and correct decision or use training as yet another opportunity to introduce the desired behavioral. If I may, I would like to go now in a list of lessons learned. The one that probably was the most shocking for me, after so many years of listening to other informational specialists saying that folder is outdated, was to hear that users actually love their folders and they cherished them much more than what non-records management specialists would like to think. The other non-expected outcome, which again is probably because of the culture surrounding us, was that it is actually metadata that is more perceived as a problem for users because they find it a little bit too daunting to navigate. And this is, I think, where the new system that we are trying to implement marries a little bit the best of the two worlds by creating a folder structure that enables metadata inheritance. And basically, you just expect that the people drag and drop the document where they need, and the document will inherit a lot of metadata without effort. Another lesson is about access controls and role definitions. They are very critical, but they're also very difficult to determine. And the way access rights are governed has a lot of implication to facilitate use and share of the information, but might also easily become a nightmare. Role-based security and records controls are vital, but difficult to introduce, especially if you are in an environment where users were granted with a wide individual freedom, and sometimes they are not very positive in giving up a little bit of their freedoms. Another important lesson that we have learned in pain, if you want, is that understanding and capturing tacit needs of users to shape the business processes and tools is a subtle art that requires truly hours of proper listening. And then two more, and then I would go probably in open questions. One struggle that we are still in the process of doing is to map each folder to the retention schedule. And we are not yet starting the other scary process of mapping all this with the previous system to make sure that the migration will be possible. And we expect this will be a little bit of a bath of blood. And then last, I think that applies not only to records management systems, but more or less to many other systems that are currently available to users. User really needs to be nudged towards making the right use of technology and systems. They need to be clearly told for which scope to use what. And it is of utmost importance to have a very clear vision at the organization level and a strategy to communicate this over and over in very consistent fashion while making the systems of records more inclusive to support other platforms, such as, for example, the beloved Teams, so that we are pretty much everyone using since we are working from home. And last, the culture of an organization is a very critical factor to both the success or a failure of any organization effort. And it is very important that we have both the top and the bottom approach to make sure that it is something wanted by management, but also understood.
Yeah.
If I still have 3 more seconds, I would like to just launch a couple of open questions, also because I am interested if you have any comments on that from our panelists. We are trying to compromise between end user asking for freedom and records management rules and governance. And we have this clash between rigorous procedures and the quest for freedom. And we are still struggling on whether it is better to incentivize user-friendly or stick to best practice. We have a problem. We have not yet decided what type of visibility we will give over the file plan. Are we going to give visibility over everything as it was in the past? Or are we just showing the user what would be tailored for the user himself or herself in the context of his business?
Prisca, sorry for your interview, but
Last question.
okay.
User-centric, but for which users? So which are the users that we should serve in a records management project? And
Yeah.
with this, I am concluding. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Seth.
So thank you very much, Prisca, and sorry for jumping in, but I have this unfortunate role of being the timekeeper. But I like very much, let's say, like the also what you sketched in regards to the importance of, or I would say more or less the obligation to hide the complexity of the filing plan and to just present something else to the end users who, at the end of the day, they don't really care about that whole complexity and want to work with a system which just makes sense to them. But I would say probably time-wise, it would make sense to just kind of continue the dialogue with, I would say, a follow-up question, which will build to some extent to some of the observations that you made, Prisca. And I would say you talked a little bit about, I would say, the challenges and the problems of kind of setting up the policy. You might think, okay, lots of different organizations have already built a filing plan. Why not reuse one instead of building one from scratch? And so, especially for, I would say, horizontal operations, or let's say HR, financial contracts, any organization has these types of activities. So why not just do a copy paste of an existing filing plan? And perhaps on this first topic, I'm expecting that Isabel and Constantin from the council, as you have been compared to, I would say, the IMF, which has already started a long time ago. I know that at the council, probably at some point you looked at the work being done at the commission, NOMCOM. And so it could just be interesting to see, based on your journey, what has been your experience of kind of facing the need to set up a filing plan, to what extent you have been able or not to reuse existing components. And so it would be just helpful to get your experience on that point. So Isabel or Constantin?
Thank you, Seth. It's my honor to begin. I will make present you an overview of our project in the council, and then Constantine will go a bit further down in the build of the filing plan. So, in the council, by the end of last year, the General Secretariat of the Council has recently adopted a new document and file management policy with new standards and requirements, and in particular including now provisions for electronic documents. The adoption of this policy is part of a more comprehensive information management framework that we are implementing in the council, and it will underpin the future of information management. In fact, the goal is to have a more coordinated and consistent approach in dealing with documents. Naturally, and following the adoption of the policy, its implementation will be gradual, and it will imply the development of different, of course, implementing rules, guidelines, recommendations, a filing plan, of course. And we are also working in a comprehensive communication plan that we hope it will help the staff to deal with all the changes, all the cultural changes that the implementation of such a policy and the use of a filing plan and the use of a comprehensive records management system will imply. So this for us is quite important. The development of these tools, including the filing plan, is being developed in close collaboration with our staff, our colleagues, and a contact group was created. we call it IMCG, Information Management Contact Group, to support the Information Management Unit team in the development of all these guiding tools and quite importantly, the filing plan. The full implementation of the policy will only happen and if once we have all the tools created and also a central records management solution selected and implemented. And Konstantin, I give you the floor to further explain this, our context. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Maybe straight to the question. We first try to reuse prior knowledge drawn during previous attempts to put in place a filing plan at the council. These attempts existed, but the lack of an IT tool prevented their implementation. We also use the knowledge of other EU institutions, as you mentioned, Seth, for the common areas. But for the most part, the General Secretariat of the Council is a secretariat for different councils and bodies, and the filing plan cannot be replicated from elsewhere. So we have to build it from scratch. In this sense, we conduct workshops with the information management correspondents that we set up throughout the organization, as Isabel mentioned, in each directorate. But we also do a bit of counter-espionage, so to say. We analyze the way they structure their information on their shared drives. And we verify the feedback that we receive from the correspondents. Furthermore, in order for them to be interested in this exercise, we address current issues they face in using their shared drives. Whether it's the application or the way they name their files and the way they retrieve information, if they face issues with that, we try to address through this analysis. Please.
Yeah, it's excellent. It just sounds like a very time-intensive operation.
Yes, we are quite a team, so to say. So it's not just the two of us. We have a whole team behind.
Okay.
Fortunately for us, yes. We also now conduct a study on the different solutions adopted by the various European institutions, trying to gain knowledge from their experience. We also take into account the adoption of one of these solutions if they would be available to us. And more importantly than that, if they prove to be suitable for our needs.
Okay.
Of course, ARES NOMCOM, as you mentioned, the European Commission solution seems to be the most appealing and in assessing it, we also take into account not only how functional it is from this point of view of the as a filing tool, but also we take into account the interinstitutional collaborative advantages that this solution would offer, and not to mention the advantages in the later stages of document and file lifecycle, namely the eventual use of the same long-term preservation platform, because we don't have one either. But apart from this, I would like to add that the utility of the filing plan as a tool in the classical sense, and even of registration as a process, started to be questioned by the business representatives in the context of the new paperless work environment. We know that we need a filing plan and filing and registration tool, but this alone is simply not acceptable in the business context of our institution anymore. So in this complex environment of IT tools that we use, for example, collaborative tools for policy officers or distribution tools to the member states, we have to explain the necessity of records management and to include capabilities that go beyond the registration and filing in order to make it attractive for the users, like workflows, Microsoft Office integration, e-signature, and easy collaboration and distribution, as I mentioned before. So yeah, indeed, the council is in a particular position as we act as a secretariat, as I mentioned, and more voices are pointing towards auto-classification based on rich metadata that a powerful electronic tool maybe can provide and manage. And I guess this brings us towards the second part of our discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we'll discuss more about automation in question 4. Thank you very much, Konstantin. But I would say, as you mentioned, you were interested in NOMCOM, which was, I would say, sitting in a specific tool managed by Digit. And this somehow brings us to the format. So how are we going to actually store and share filing plans? I think in the best of worlds, people are doing it in Excel, or in some kind of custom built plugin for SharePoint or OpenText, what have you. So of course, it would be a lot more interesting to start thinking about more elegant solutions. And I think Kuldar here in the group probably has some thoughts on how we could try to move away from having a filing plan imprisoned in proprietary software somewhere. So Kuldar?
Indeed. So yeah, maybe just to start a few steps earlier. Again, from the National Archives point of view, the situation or the trouble we have in the end of the day is that we have something like a few hundred, 300, 400 public sector agencies. All of them have their filing plans or retention plans or classification schemes, whatever you like to call them. And the job of the National Archives is to each of these organizations. And well, if you haven't done it, then trust me, it's not too fun when you have already looked at the 100th Excel sheet with a filing plan, which is not necessarily showing the HR records or financial contracts of the agency in a correct and logical way. And that's actually an issue which already was very much visible in the paper age. So we started looking into it with our appraisal and agency consultation team at the National Archives in the late 1990s. So the first step we took was just to kind of a straightforward. If everybody gets their spreadsheets and Excel plans wrong, then we as the best experts in Estonia do the filing plans for the agencies ourselves, at least what concerns the most common records, again, HR, financial records, financial contracts, facility management, etc., all the standard functions of an agency. So we started with these standardized filing plans. We started putting them out. Everybody was saying that, yeah, good work, nicely done. We take these and we reuse these. A few years later, we went into the agencies. We looked at their records management systems and places, other document systems where these filing plans were supposed to be implemented. And what came out is that everybody is a little bit special. There are slight changes in how you implement the filing plan in reality within the systems. And so then we started looking into the next steps. And that's where we started thinking more about the point that we need to have a web-based solution, something which gives the control over the filing plan to both the National Archives and also the agency. So kind of a possibility to have a central place for the National Archives where we can see all the retention rules and filing plans that are implemented in the agencies, and yet at the same time the agency can always synchronize this with this knowledge base with their own document systems. And over the years, obviously, the point came that not all information and relevant information is in PDF formats and doc formats, but it's also as relational data within different information systems or databases. And as such, yeah, what we are now developing in Estonia is a central system, and there we are starting with quite a simple XML-based solution or format for a retention schedule or a filing plan, and that's the kind of the first step which we are now trying to force into all of the Estonian agencies. So wherever you maintain your official data, wherever you maintain your official records, and this kind of XML structure is something you should support. This kind of structure, this kind of information about the filing plan is something you need to share with the National Archives. Yeah. Obviously, the kind of the long-term aim for us is to really get into the linked data world, and we want this information we are slowly gathering from agencies about their classification schemes to use it to build, at least initially, an Estonian kind of list of government functions and list of government activities, which would then be available as a kind of a linked data environment component, and that could be then be shared and reused in agencies in a more data-like fashion, as opposed to a document-like
yeah, it seems
fashion.
that you're getting closer to the holy grail of, let's say, records management. Being able to, I think it's a very good approach to start simple with these XML structures, and then try to kind of prepare for this, let's say, linked data environment where you can share and reuse in an elegant way blocks from different administrations. And so
to add a timeline here, really, I'm talking about 5 to 10 years, not that in 2022 the linked data world is a practice in Estonia.
Well, I would say
more realistic.
Yeah. So jumping from one of my preferred topics to another topic of preference, let's say destruction or death of or the end of the lifespan of information. I say this more in a kind of I'd say, to just stir up a little bit of debate, but especially I would say within an information governance context where we have, I would say, a very important and a growing body of legislation like GDPR. I would say destruction of information is one of the core, I would say, tasks of an information manager. And I think before jumping to the last debate on automation, that would be very interesting to just talk a little bit how actually being able to put an intellectual control over your content can facilitate the destruction process. And in this sense, I think that Bernice from European Central Bank has some extensive experience and some stories to share. So Bernice, if you can enlighten us on, I would say, some of the workflows that you've put in place to destroy information in line with your government, in line with your information governance policy.
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much, Seth. Thank you. I have to point out something because I was very happy to hear Prisca mention Fiorella Foscarini's name. Professor Foscarini at the University of Toronto was actually the creator of our business classification that in 2008, basically. And until 2020, it's evolved very, very much. And we now have a very, very developed retention schedule attached to it. And this is very much the backbone of our records management system and our enterprise content management system as well. So I was very happy that Fiorella's name was mentioned. I don't think she would recognize her business classification though now. We have 10 retention periods, and ranging from 3 months, which helps us to deal with all the challenges that GDPR has been bringing us since 2018, to ensure that data subject records and data are protected and safeguarded and deleted as soon as it's not needed, which is a cornerstone of the GDPR as well. And then it ranges over 10, 15, 20 years until our permanent status, which obviously is also very important for us to then deliver to the European citizens that will eventually be researching and looking into the records for historical purposes as well. We cover the digital and physical media, so it's a retention schedule that covers all the media that we have. And it also emphasizes time-based and event-based activities. What's important here is that it's integrated into our enterprise content management system, so that in such a way that our time-based activities require no intervention by end users whatsoever. So, for example, a document that they will have been working on at some point, if they no longer edit it after 2 years, it's basically declared as a record. and they can no longer touch it, modify it in any way. In terms of event-based activities, for example, if we were to have a court case prepared, then there would be a little bit of manual intervention by the end user to close the file, and then it would be declared, so to say, as a record, and then it would no longer be tampered with or could be moved or any way, and would then be retained within our business classification and retention schedule, without the end user really knowing it, because it's all integrated in the system. But what's important here, and I'd like to point out, is that activities such like court cases need that manual intervention, because obviously the end user understands when that activity comes to an end. So that is important for them to actually provide that trigger. So that's a manual finalization and closing of the file, which is important because the business area has the knowledge of when it needs to be closed. A little bit about the description of the actual process might be a little bit interesting. We're trying to perfect it, so we're not quite there, but we're getting there. So basically, we have set aside different quarters of the year where we actually do different stages of destruction. And so basically we dedicate the last quarter of the year, the fourth quarter of the year, basically to verify that the retention schedules is up to date, the business, the retention periods are correctly assigned to the folders, because we have a very similar system, enterprise content management system, to what they have at the IMF, as Prisca has described, with folders. So the end user doesn't realize that the retention classifications are being assigned. That is done by the record manager in conjunction with that department. And so in quarter 4 of the year, that's when we actually ensure that there's a correct assignment of these retention classifications. And because it can happen with reorganizations and changes, some modifications are needed. Come the first quarter of the year, we're already getting ready to create our disposition reports, because the destruction and disposition is due always on the 31st of December of any given year. So we're always busy in the first quarter of the year preparing these disposition lists that are divided by department, so basically the different functions, the different retention periods that we have, and also whether those retention periods are time-based or event-based. And then these disposition reports are sort of prepared, repackaged, so that they're easier to digest for the approvers of the different business areas or departments. The next stage is asking for an approval. We're basically looking now towards not a very formal approval, but more of what we call a tacit approval, whereby the business area alerts us, please keep these documents, or no, I approve them, they can be destroyed. And the important aspect here is that with a tacit approval is that if we don't get an approval, they will be destroyed. So this is what we're moving towards. No response equals an approval. I just wanted to highlight that, though, here, it's important that we work, though, with the departments, because if there's like an ongoing court case, there may be an appeal. So it's important that we put on hold those folders and records that may be needed simply because there's another activity coming up that we see in the future, and then those records will still be required. So,
and Denise, in the case of a court case, do you reopen a closed file, or do you create a new file which is linked to the file which was closed but which has relevance in the context of a court case?
Well, basically, we would have a retention period that would be long enough to allow us to assess whether, for example, an appeal would be coming up once the court case has been finalized.
Okay.
So it would be a fairly long time period. So for allow us to manage that scenario if it were to come up.
Yeah.
So obviously we wouldn't destroy the records within a year or 2 years. We would give ourselves probably 10, 15 years just to make sure that if an appeal does come up, we do have that buffer and that time period to work with.
Yeah. Indeed.
So the allocation of the actual time periods and retention periods is very important according to each activity. Because yes, for something that's more data protection related, as I mentioned before, it would have a very short then retention period.
And so to understand correctly, many of the processes, and for example, when you describe that in the fourth quarter of the year, that you pay specific attention to reviewing the, I would say, the retention periods, etc. But if I understand correctly, many of the once everything is configured, the appraisal to a large extent is fully automated.
Yes. Obviously, a lot of work goes in beforehand
of course.
to be able to automate it. But once that effort has been invested, then it becomes more and more automated.
Yeah.
The technology is there, so it's a matter of using the technology that's embedded in the system, basically.
Yeah. So I'm just looking a little bit at the time, and I think the fourth question will also trigger inputs probably from all of you. But Bernice, thank you very much, and I think that being able to comply with GDPR data protection is one of the key selling points for records management. So I hope in the future that we can set up an extra event to just talk exclusively about appraisal and destruction. But I would say this brings us then, or with the jump on, I would say, automating destruction brings us to the, I would say, the fourth and the last question. And I'm sure that everyone on the panel already, to some extent, talked about, of course, software and automating some of the approaches. Of course, since a couple of years, there has been a tremendous hype on machine learning. But very often, in reality, the results can be rather mixed, or you really need to perform a lot of effort. I think it's very much, Bernice, in the line of what you were just saying. Automation is fantastic, but you need to put a lot of effort into it. And I think I'm very happy that Frederik Rosseel is also with us here today. He has quite extensive experience from the vendor perspective on rolling out automation. And so, Frederik, it could be very interesting if you could share some stories on, I would say, where automation has worked and where it hasn't worked in regards to auto classification, and perhaps shed your light whether we'll still need archivists in 5 or 10 years' time.
Thank you, Seth. So, as said, I've been working in archiving since 2010, and one of the biggest challenges has always been convincing the business of the need of adding metadata or adding information to the right location in the file plan. I've heard from the various speakers the same types of challenges. And back in 2010, you can find it on SlideShare. I did a couple of times a presentation with regard to the main reasons for failures in implementing records management systems. And that was already a challenge back then. So different types of solutions have been implemented over time: folder inheritance, folder mapping, dashboarding systems, statistical solutions in which you try to based on different types of documents to add the right classification or the top level classification of the documents. All types of solutions have been tried, and where it comes to machine learning and archiving, a combination of statistical, so based on the basic types of documents, and where you have the biggest extraction or classification technologies such as SCIO and others can indeed provide good results. But one of the main issues is that very often a file plan is conceived with the users, and how would I say, it's sometimes a theoretical model. And if you have a file plan that has, let's say, 8 levels in the file plan, it might very often be the case that you won't have sufficient data on your 8th level, to put it like that, to apply automatic classification. That is something which is very often overlooked. If you have unstructured information, you need a big document or data set to be able to train that model. And in practice, very often, those documents are not there. It might be the case on the, let's put it, the base level, where you have to identify a service or a department. That's true because for those you'll have sufficient information. If you look at one of the things, so we started with machine learning NLP back in 2015. And for us in 2016, that shifted because we're a business. So we're looking for use cases and business opportunities. And for us, one of the things was GDPR, of course, in which we said, look, if we could start at least with having automated flagging of documents that contain PII, even that wasn't an easy exercise. So you could take a statistical approach there, because if you have different types of documents, let's say contracts, HR documents, the chance of having PII in those documents is way higher than on other types of documents. And then you could add other types of extraction based on thesauri or taxonomies to the mix. Over time, what we've also seen is that different tools that were on the market, so within OpenText or Documentum, content intelligence services or file intelligence services, those were mainly, or still where they still exist, or mainly thesaurus based, so based on keywords that you'll find in documents. But that's a really hefty experience. That's if you start with creating your file plan and defining your metadata and getting agreement from the users on the different metadata. And next to that, you also have to do the exercise with constructing a thesaurus and compile the different combinations that define that the metadata. That's humongous work. So in practice, it's not that easy to implement and to look at machine learning as the almighty, what I say, solution to save the or to keep users from adding metadata manually. The work for the archivist will always be there. For us, within technology, we always look at other types of actions that could be automated, and that's with regard to long-term preservation. A lot of actions can be automated, but when it comes to metadata, that's not that simple.
Thanks very much, Frederik. I don't know if Kuldar wants to chip in briefly. We still have, I think, 3 minutes left for our slot.
Yeah, just very briefly, just saying the Estonian practice is also that automation in the end of the day is a must. There is no way that you can solve the questions of retention, destruction, and archiving in a kind of a data environment, a mass data environment, manually, like the practice of creating file plans, managing file plans has been. So that requires a little bit of rethinking. It requires a little bit of the learning also of the records professionals and records managers to add the new skills of automation into their portfolio. But in the end of the day, the encouraging message, which I've learned over the years, is that the technology is there. That sentence was actually said before as well. And the main burden or the main trouble, if you really want to get into automated classification, automated data management in these aspects, The technology is there, but we need to learn ourselves. We need to agree on the core standards and core specifications. And we really think in Estonia the kind of a classifier, a ontology of business functions is really the one of the first thing, a piece of reference data which is needed for this automation to really happen in practice effectively and reasonably.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And with regard to that there's even a bigger challenge because your ontology can change over time. And if you want to add, that's a requirement that we've seen, for example, in the Netherlands, they want to build some sort of time warp machine to see changes in metadata over the years. So if you would want to automate that, that's even a bigger challenge.
Yeah.
Indeed, but we can be lucky that our work is not going to be done in 2 or 3 years. So there is really things to do for the next decade or more.
Yeah. So I see Jennifer back on stage. So I'm afraid that we'll gently have to wrap up. It's we have probably 30 seconds left. It's a pity that I hope that next year, for the next iteration, that we can reorganize a panel on retention schedules, and that we can actually all meet up. And at the end of the conference, the only thing I would like to do is to have now a beer with all of you. Unfortunately, this is not possible, but let's hope that we can reorganize something next year and that we'll all together in the same space. But thank you all very much for your input. I have been unable to follow up on the Slido, but I'm assuming that the team who will do the wrap-up can perhaps include some elements in, I would say, the more generic wrap-up. But so thank you all for your inputs, and Jennifer, happy to give you back the floor for the final closing.
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, it was an intense panel there. You really covered an awful lot of ground. So very well done. I would have been even willing to give you a few more minutes to let you wrap up. I didn't want to put pressure on anyone. So I think we have a question that has just come in. I don't know whether if you have a chance, Seth, to answer this about engaging the archiving process from a reference data perspective requires interaction between the archive systems and reference data. And do you see any way to promote that? That's just a latest question that has just come in. Ah, we've lost you. I think we've gone. I think at this point we will wrap up. We have got a survey via Slido. You can go again to Slido, that's sli.do on your browser, or you can also go to slido.com. Once you're there, you just put in the code ENDORSE 2021 and you can fill in the survey. There's no need to download anything, but this will be really useful for us going forward. Obviously, it is key in the context of today's and the coming days conference that we want to gather as much data as possible. I think that today has been a very good kick-off for our 4-day event. We've looked at understanding the people data tasks ecosystem, which as our speakers were saying was crucial for the reliability of data, and also about understanding the knowledge scientists that so many of you are, acting between data producers and consumers. So we will acknowledge that as well. We also talked about implementing good reference data management in organizations, as well as hearing right back at the beginning on the current progress for a corporate reference data management policy for the European Commission. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. Yonah made some really clear and concise thoughts available on metadata, classifying language and its use in media, as well as the case we heard for intelligent content and the potential for both content standards and applied semantics as ways of automatically delivering content alongside the data for more targeted contexts. And of course, in general, we saw the importance of interoperability across all levels of government and across public services. So that's a very broad wrap-up of what we've heard about this afternoon. Of course, there are ways to keep sharing information. Please keep tweeting, sharing on social media, asking questions, and we will talk to you again tomorrow afternoon when the theme will be law as code and indeed more interoperability, of course. And we will have a keynote by Serena Vilata who will be discussing knowledge representation and semantically enriched information extraction for interoperable legal technology. So law is the watchword tomorrow. I hope you've enjoyed today's sessions and found them informative and enriching, and that you will have a good evening and join us again tomorrow at 1 o'clock CET.